A beautiful morning, and it's a Friday. This is the newspaper review. My name is Alfonsoh Albakwekwe. Today I'll be flying solo, and as we always put it, this is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. To set the ball rolling today, we start with the Standard newspaper, and the elephant in the room is Ruto bids court to a bloated government. Now, President William Ruto's move to have CASs sworn into office minutes before a court case challenging the legality of the appointments has raised questions, despite being a chance to finish composition of the executive. More of that story on page 8 of the Standard newspaper. National news: Chiloba media censure threat met with anger. That story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. Also on page 10 and page 11, the Ramadan blessings, prayers and diet during lean times. And on to some sport news. Confusion rocks Man United buyout bid. Now let's take a look at the stories inside the Standard newspaper. We start with page 3. New twist unfolds in elderly couples cold blood murder. Now, family members now link the two killings to a dispute over prime property in Nairobi. Detectives on the ground working round the clock to unravel the mystery behind the killing. More of that story on page 3 of the Standard newspaper. Moving on swiftly, page 4, Civil Society KUJ accuses Chiloba of gauging press. Now, Katiba Institute demands CA revokes unconstitutional notice sent to 6 media houses. Groups say the decision is a threat to freedom of expression, information, and the media. More of that story on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. Page 5, MPs among help defaulters, says Ringera. Some 140,000 students in universities and TVET colleges may miss out on the funding. Help boss warns that employers are equally liable for any loan default. More of that story on page 5. Let's take a look on page 6. Raila claims Gachagua plotting to disrupt peaceful Azimio protests. Now, he alleges some leaders plotting to hire youths and have them dress up in MDC to cause chaos. Kimani Ichung'wah dismisses claims, asks Raila to respect the deputy president. More of that story on page 6. Page 7, give me time to deliver on my pledges, says President William Ruto. Now, the president calls for an end to demonstrations, saying the nation's economy is at stake. He will be in Kisii for 3 days, dishing out goodies in a fresh bid with the region. More of that story on page 7. On page 8, Ruto witnesses swearing in of 50 CASs amid debate on legitimacy. The swearing in came in an hour before a case challenging the legality of the CASs appointments was to be mentioned. The 50 CASs were appointed after National Assembly Speaker declined to have Parliament vet them. All right, let's take a look at page 10, and it's all about Ramadan Mubarak, testing the rich blessings of the holy month Ramadan. Now, simple yet powerful supplication underscores the richness of the holy month. Scholars of Hadith and Quran have singled out many benefits that a fasting person can get. More of that story is also on page 10. Page 11, how to observe prayer during the holy month. Tahajjud is exclusively praying, and there are 2 opinions concerning it. One is that it means praying at any time of the night, which is the view of the majority of Fuqaha. You can catch more of that story on page 11. Let's move on to page 12, still under national news. 2 boys starved to death on pastor's word. Now, pastor had warned that disease would wipe out earth. A 3rd malnourished boy was rescued by police. Such a sad state of affairs there. You want to get more insights on that story? It's beefed up for you on page 12 of today's Standard newspaper. Also, let's take a look at some expert opinion right here. Now, Raila has no moral authority to lead protests over cost of living. That is a sentiment by Michael Ndonye. You can get more of that story on page 14 of the Standard newspaper. Now let's move on and take a look at some more stories. New technology in the diagnosis and treatment of TB brings hope to many. Now, computer-aided detection helps trace people who have no symptoms of TB but are infected. With preventive therapy for family, patients will no longer be told not to share basic items. More of that story on page 18 of the Standard newspaper. Now, also prize Ruto 6 to win despite their previous fights with Matiang'i. Now, 3 weeks ago, the former CS was a hunted man as rumors swirled that he had fled the country. Matiang'i will be among the key guests at CS Ezekiel Machogu's homecoming ceremony in Kisii next week. More of that story on page 20. Also, on some county news, we move to Kisumu County. Nyong'o UK farm signed 31 billion Kenya shillings deal to bolster smart farming. Now, pre-production activities of the project are expected to commence at the start of the next financial year. Governor Nyong'o said it would also increase a strong demand for high-quality, safe food products. You can catch more of that story on page 23 of the Standard newspaper. Let's take a look at some business news. Now, CIC insurance profit up to 64% to 1 billion Kenya shillings. You can also get to read more of that story on page 25. Let's take a look at some sports news today on the Standard newspaper. Now, on sports, redemption moment for Shujaa at Hong Kong Sevens. Relegation threatened Kenya face uphill task against New Zealand today. Mark Grath has been boosted by the return of Olwach and Olindi. More of that story is on page 33 of the Standard newspaper. Also, Kimutai upbeat ahead of Sunday's Lukenya race. Victor Kimutai from Narok will be among the many athletes who will line up to look for glory in the men's 10-kilometer category at the inaugural Lukenya University 1 Million Trees Marathon on Sunday. More of that story on page 33 of the Standard newspaper. Also, on school games, heavyweights, St. Mary Siala and Kisumu Day dominate games. Siaya County Day 1 results, or you can get to read how the school games have been going on the Mashinani, and more of that is on page 35. Also, in Taita Taveta County, national champs, Dr. Agri Fire warning shots. More insights on that story on page 35. And now on the cover page of the Standard newspaper this morning, African teams resume battle for tickets to AFCON finals. Where do the teams stand ahead of next batch of AFCON 2023 qualifiers? National team Harambee Stars forced to play friendly matches as others play in qualifiers. You can get more of that story on the back page of the Standard newspaper. We have Group A, Group B, all the way to Group F, and how they have been grouped in those pools. It goes all the way to Group L. You can get to read more of that on the cover page of today's Standard newspaper. Now, I want us to go on a short commercial break. We are coming back with the Daily Nation. Don't touch that dial.
In 1889, boxes that could reproduce sound were invented. Forget about history. We offer music recording, commercial adverts, skiza tunes, podcast, and voiceovers. We are located in Syker along Kangondo Road, and you can also reach us on our social media platforms on Younib TV on Instagram and Younib Media on Facebook, or call us on 0719144144. Younib, ever the best.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Triple side, kata simu manze. This is Rising Star, the best show in East and Central Africa, au sio manze? So leo manze tuko hapa Kanairo, au sio? I go by the name Alex, or you can call me the guy. So sisi kama Rising Star manze tumekuja na vitu mzuri. Hii mwaka tumeamua tunapiga shughuli safi vile mnataka, hivyo ndio tunapiga hii show, au sio? So kwa Rising Star tutakuwa na segments zingine hatari. Kitu ya kwanza tutakuwa na tea. Tukimalizia show yetu manze tutakuwa tunawaletea tea, what is trending, and then also pale tutakuwa na games. Unajua nini na games manze? So guest wetu wakikam through tutakuwa tunacheza game, alafu pia tutakuwa na ile segment pia ya maswali ya kujua wasanii wetu wametoka wapi, challenges zenye wamekuwa wakipitia, au sio? Yes. Bila kumalizia manze, tunasemaga mnaweza tupata pale YouTube at Younib Media TV, au sio? Yes. So bila kupoteza wakati manze, thank you so much, we love you so much, continue watching Younib TV, and this is Rising Star. Kaboom. That's it.
Imagine waking up to a show every morning that entertains, educates,
that keeps you glued to the screen with interesting topics. Talk about health, fashion, business, fitness, and spiritual nourishment. Whether you're enjoying your cup of coffee, tea, milk, ama uji, Younib Breakfast Show is the place to be. Every Tuesday and Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. with me, Penina Washara, here on Younib TV.
Welcome back to the newspaper review. I am your host, Alfonsoh Albakwekwe, and now we take a look at the stories making the headlines on the Daily Nation. The elephant in the room, the hardliners, allies of President Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga are stoking the flames. Now, we have sentiments here from different government officials, and we are only going to sample three from Deputy President, the President, and the opposition leader. Now, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua says, we want to tell members of the clergy that we have heard you and we respect you, but why are you telling us to hold dialogue with someone who has been blackmailing us? We are telling the clergy not to request us to sanction blackmail and impunity. That is a sentiment by the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. President William Ruto says, I want to tell that friend of mine, stop bothering yourself with the demonstrations. Plan yourself well for 2027. By then, I will have prepared myself more. Stop bothering citizens. You are disturbing them by taking war, chaos, and protests to them. On the other hand, Raila Odinga says, we don't want talks. We want the truth, and we want our demands met. To those saying we want a handshake, this is an insult to the intelligence of Kenyans. More sentiments are on the front page. You can get to read them when you grab your copy of the Daily Nation. Other stories making the headlines: MPs to summon Machogu, NEC chiefs in KCSC cheating probe. That story is on the back page. Also, as millions celebrated return of rains, some Kenyans were not so happy. Floods wreak havoc as rains pound several parts of the country. Move that story on page 2 and page 3 of the Daily Nation. Also, digging in as the clock ticks towards Monday and a fresh round of anti-government protests, the case for a truce between President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga has been hit by a hardening of positions, even as Kenyans continue to feel the pinch of the high cost of living. What will it take for the two rivals and their troops to tame their tongues and make peace? More of that story on page 6 and page 7. Also, Civil servants set for new higher travel allowances. SRC proposal to pile more pressure on wage bill. More of that story on page 8 of the Daily Nation. Let's take a look at the in-depth stories that are making headlines on the nations. Now, on page 2, showers of blessings turn into curse of a deluge as skies open. Now, raw sewage was swept into homes by a roaring river Ngong. For Reverend Njoya, the flooding of his Kirinyo Rock Gardens home in Ngong, Kajiado, has come at a dire cost. You can get more of that story on page 2. Also, on page 5, let's start with page 4. There is a top story here. Ruto sidesteps petition as CSS are sworn in ahead of hearing. Court directs the 50 CASS, AG, National Assembly, PSC, and SRC to file responses by 27th of March. Petitioner had sought to have the court stop the swearing in of the CASS until case is heard and determined. Now, the big question remains, what if the court rules against the 53 or the 50 CASS? What if the court rules against the 50 CASS that were already appointed? What next then? Now, let's take a look at page 5. No show, PS Angas Senate Committee. Treasury owes the 47 counties a total of 122.1 billion Kenya shillings after failing 4 months behind schedule. More of that story on page 5 of the Daily Nation. On page 6 and page 7, headliners deem chances of Ruto-Raila dialogue, and that was the story that was on the front page of the Daily Nation. Now you can get to read more of it in depth on page 6 and on page 7. Also, Ruto and Gachagua say they will not be blackmailed to talks, and Rigathi Gachagua says, "We want to tell members of the clergy that we have heard you and we respect you. But why are you telling us to hold dialogue with someone who is blackmailing us?" More of that story on page 7. Let's take a look at page 8. Civil servants to get higher travel allowances in Salaries and Remuneration Commission plan. Now, new rates to benefit state officers traveling outside Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, and Nakuru. Changes will see daily local travel allowances go up between 1,200 and 8,000 Kenya shillings. More of that story is on page 8. Let's take a look at page 10. Learners plead for help to join Form 1. At the beginning of this month, Education CS said 160,000 learners had not reported to secondary schools. While their peers report back after half-term, these young girls and boys are yet to start their secondary education. More of that story on page 10. Let's take a look at page 12. Goswami, former drug lord, now a state witness. Goswami grew up in Ahmedabad, India, where he made a living as bootlegger. More of that story on page 12 of the Daily Nation. Let's take a look at some opinion. Build more sand dams for permanent water security. There are sentiments here by Ashok Shah, and he says, they are low-cost solution as they only require pump installation. They are low-cost solution as they only require pump installation. Also, Vivian Hinga says, reckless driving and ignoring traffic rules is almost a routine. That is in regards to rotten apples spoiling Kenya's matatu culture. Now, also, beyond legal compliance, traders need social license. And Mashari Kea, who is a business person, says they must operate in a socially responsible manner. Let's continue. There are more of expert opinion stories here, telling a true and complete story of return to chaos in our streets. Now, Peter Mwaura, Public Editor's Notebook, says Mwinzi set a high standard for covering a protest. I think that is a round of applause to that guy. Let's take a look at more stories. There's an article here, DN2 The Voice. If you manage to grab your copy of the Standard, the Daily Nation, you can get to read more of the stories that are in here. We have primitive attacks on our women, an indictment of society. Also on my network, zeroing in the Zoomers, Generation Z, more of those stories on that article. Meet the Form 4 school leaver who has built a workforce of 14. More of that story on page 4 of the DN2 article. Now, I think it's that time that we take a look at more stories, and that should be business news. Let's take a look at what we have in as far as business news is concerned. Before we get to business news, let's take a look at some international news. Now, Hope as TPLF delisted as terror organization. After 2 years of bloodbath, Tigray's main airport in the region's capital, Mekelle, was reopened. Optimism, Uhuru and Obasanjo led the talks that ended in the signing of peace agreement. More of that story on page 26 of the Daily Nation. Also on page 27, clean influencers sweep TikTok, drawing millions of followers. Now, voiceovers explain how the person being helped ended up living in squalor. TikTok influencer Auri Kanen wearing pink gloves and making victory signs as she sits on a pile of trash and food remains at a flat in Helsinki, Finland on January 19th. That is a photo you will find attached on page 27 of the Daily Nation as you get to read more of that story. Touch Putin at own peril, ICC told. This is a news that happened in Moscow yesterday. Any attempt to arrest Vladimir Putin would be a declaration of war against Russia, the president's ally Dmitry Medvedev said after the International Criminal Court ICC put out a warrant for the Russian leader over war crimes. The court accuses Putin of deporting thousands of children from Ukraine. More of that story still on international news on page 27 of the Daily Nation. Let's take a look at the markets and touch on some business news. Expensive loans beckon as tight cash hits banks. The interbank rate, the interest on loans between banks, was 7.16% on March 2022. Data shows that 17.9 billion is the average amount in shillings of loans borrowed daily between banks. More of that story on page 28 of the Daily Nation. Let's now take a look at sports news on today's Nation, and it takes us to golfing. Now, High Court stops eagerly awaited rugby elections. Positions of Vice Chairman, Treasurer, Secretary, 5 directors were up for grabs in the AGM. Also, Centurion Dr. Agri sound loud basketball warning. More of that story on page 36 under sports news. Also, inform Karanga going for a hat-trick of wins in the KAGC at Muthaiga Open. That's all about golfing. On some football, Kenyan Premier League top scorer Omala gutted after being dropped from Harambee Stars team. More of that story on page 38. On page 37, Karanga chases hat-trick of wins. This is golf. Karen hosts annual party club of Milimani, while Railway will stage nomadic series. Also, Starlets are back, but it's their management by FKF any better? This is a question being posed right here. Starlets are back, but is their management by FKF any better? You can get to read more of that story on page 37 of the Daily Nation. Also, the weekend golf fixtures is right here. You can get to take a look on it if you are a golf enthusiast. Now, let's take a look at page 38. Have a league to win, Mift Omala says after Stars snub. Now, international football also, Virat names 24-man squad to travel to Tehran for a friendly match. Let's take a look at Euro 2024 qualifiers. France begin new era with Mbappe as the team captain. More of that story on page 38 of the Daily Nation. Also, Manchester United owners await revised purchase offers. UEFA probe Barca refereeing scandal, and also French fixture to be played in Bangkok. Those are stories also making the headlines on sports news in a snippet, and that is outlined for you on page 38 of the Standard newspaper. Also, let's take a look at the state of our stadiums, a special series. And a big step up, Governor Lusaka hopeful that Bungoma will be able to host international football matches. Masinde Muliro Stadium shaping up into modern world-class sports facility. You can get to see that photo on page 39. Now, the venue will have a seating capacity of 5,000, changing rooms, medical center, VIP lounge, drainage system, and roofed pavilion. All that is on page 39. Also, data says 650 million shillings is the cost of constructing the 5,000-seater Masinde Muliro Kandui Stadium. And at the cover page of today's Daily Nation, MPs to summon education officials over exam cheating. Now, House Education team says parliamentary findings show there was cheating in KCSE exam. More of that story on the cover page, and you'll get to see a photo here where National Assembly Education Committee Chairperson Julius Meli, accompanied by other members, addressed journalists yesterday after a public hearing on allegations of cheating in the 2022 KCSE exams at the Coast National Polytechnic Hall in Mombasa. Also, there's a report here, committee to table report, and that is a committee of two. National Assembly Education Committee Chairperson Julius Meli said the team will table its report on the alleged KCSE exam cheating in the next 2 months. Also, another story making the headline on the cover page of the Daily Nation, legal battle looms as lawmakers say BRT is not value for money. Now, a legal battle between the Kenyan government and Chinese companies involved in the 5.58 billion bus rapid transport, that is the BRT, project in Nairobi is looming after MP said it has no offer value for money. The two Chinese construction firms, Stekol Corporation, in a joint venture with SMEDI, were contracted by the government to construct the 24.7-kilometer Ruiru-Nairobi Central Business District Kenyatta National Hospital BRT on February 12th, 2020. You can get to read more of that story on the cover page of the Daily Nation. Now, that brings us to an end of today's newspaper review. Those are the stories making the headlines on the papers. You are now up to date with the current affairs, today being a Friday. I know most of you are waiting to jump into the weekend and enjoy their weekend. As you drive into the weekend, party responsibly, don't drink and drive. And we are looking forward to seeing you again on Monday. Many thanks for choosing to stay with us right here at Younib TV. This is the best youth television network in East and Central Africa. This has been the newspaper review, the home of authentic touch when it comes to matters, stories making the headlines. I have been your host, Alfonsoh Albakwekwe. See you on Monday, same time, same place. Bye-bye.